Hey everyone, I'm Hanif and welcome to my channel. I'm a senior software developer and AI engineer with 20 years of experience working in the field. This is my first YouTube video and I wanted to kick things off with something I'm genuinely excited about. To stay updated with the latest PHP development, I rely on this website, php.watch. It's a comprehensive resource that covers PHP news, version updates, RFCs, and more. So let's navigate to the PHP 8.5 section to see what is new. All right, as you can see, the release is expected around November 20th. And we've got a pretty solid list of new features and deprecations. So let me walk you through them briefly before we dive into code examples. So the first one is new curl multi-get handles. So what is this? This new feature lets you retrieve all handles from the multi-curl session, make it easier to manage multi-concurrent HTTP requests. PHP build date constant, you can now access the exact build date of your PHP binary, get exception handler and get error handler functions. So finally, PHP now gives us function to retrieve the current error and exception handlers. This is a big for frameworks and custom error systems. The next one is a stack trace support for PHP fatal errors. And as you know, before this, when PHP crashed, you got a vague message. Now you will see a full stack trace even for fatal errors. So this will make debugging way easier, right? So the next one is two new functions. Local is right to left or local is right to left. So what are these? These are good for those building multilingual apps. This tells you whether a given locale uses a right to left script. For example, think about Arabic, Hebrew, or Persian. The next one is new array first and array last functions. So these are simple but powerful. So quickly grab the first and the last item in an array without messing with reset or end. The next one is a CLI command, which is the php-ini equal diff to output non-default ini directives. So what is this one? This command shows only the ini directives that differ from the default. It's super useful when debugging custom PHP setups, right? And for the deprecations, all m hash constants are no deprecated. If you're still using the old m hash function, it's time to fully migrate to the hash API. So that's the bird's eye view of what's coming in 8.5. Now let's break this down one by one with code examples so you can actually see how they work. All right, let's review the first one together, which is a new feature, and it's a new function, which is the curl multi-get handles. So what does it do? Simple. It lets you retrieve all the individual curl handles that you have added to a multi-handle, right? Before this, you had to track those manually yourself, usually using something like a weak map to avoid memory leaks, right? Let's review this sample together. As you can see here, with we are creating in this line, we are creating a curl multi-handle by initializing it. So this object will manage multiple curl handles at once, right? And then in this line, we are getting the list of curl handlers that have been added to our multi-handle. So we haven't added anything before that. So obviously it will return an empty array. And then here we are, and then here we're creating individual curl handles for each URL, as you can see. So what are these? These are the actual requests we want to send. And then here In this one, we're adding these curl handles to our multi handles, right? So basically, we say that we are registering them for parallel processing, right? And then here, when we get the list from the object, it's returns, ch1, ch2 because we added them before, right? So as you can see, instead of manually keeping track of ch1 and ch2 somewhere else, you just ask the multi-handle directly that, hey, who do you have? And it simply tells you, you know. So what's happening behind the scene is that if I come to this part of this article, this new function lives in global namespace and doesn't break anything, right? It only enhances the existing multi-curl functionality. So as you can see here, the libcurl has a similar function in PHP 8.5, right? So PHP's versions doesn't depend on that. So it's fully implemented natively in PHP, right? So let's look into this part, which is the old way and how you had done it before, right? So as you can see, we create an object here, then we create a weak map object here, then we initiate the handles, we add them, but we have to keep track of each one separately somewhere else, which is this one. It's not terrible, but definitely more overhead and more places for bikes, right? And so to sum it up, this function is a small addition, but a really nice quality of life improvement for developers dealing with concurrent HTTP requests in PHP, right? Let's move on to the next feature. So for the next feature, I'm gonna go to 8.5 feature list, then PHP build date constant, right? So what is this one? This is again a small but very handy addition, the PHP build date. And as you know, that PHP already gives us, the PHP version, PHP versions ID, and even PHP OS. But until now, there was no straightforward way to know when the PHP binary was built, unless you scrape PHP info and get the values, And let's be honest, parsing HTML output from PHP info isn't exactly clean. But right now, we can, with PHP 8.5, you can now simply do this, echo, PHP build date, and you can get the build date, Maybe you have this question, maybe you ask that why does this matter? Why it's important, Well, let's say you're managing multiple environments or Docker containers and want to ensure that they were built from the same PHP binary or image, You can know log or compare build time together, right? This is how people use to get this info before, right? We PHP info and we 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 have to scrape it to get the build time, right? Not exactly pretty, and it depends on whether you are running it in a CLI or through a web server because the output format changes. And also, if I come here, so this is a note about the format, So this J, which is the date, is less than 10. So it will add another. So it's a space prefix, right? So it will give you the values like this. Do you see this space here? This is how the PHP formats that, right? And obviously, if you want to convert it to the timestamps, or if you want to reformat it, you can use the date time immutable. You can create it like this, and then you can convert it to the timestamps or reformat it, right? So Overall, this PHP build date is a neat little addition that simplifies environment introspection and make it easier to debug or verify consistency between builds, right? Okay, let's dive into the next feature. Get exception handler and get error handler functions. Okay, what are these? This feature is one of those finally moments of developers who have ever written custom errors handling logic, right? PHP has always let us set custom error and exception handlers using, set error handler and set exception handler. But weirdly, there was no way to check what is the current handler is, right? Like once you set it and that's it, you're on your own. But now with these features, with these new functions in PHP 8.5, which are the get error handler and get exception handler, so we have this ability to actually inspect what's set. Let's see that in action. So as you can see here, we call this method here, and it's returning null because we haven't set anything yet. But after we set a role handler, you see, and we call it, so it's returning back the object. So we can actually inspect that. So maybe, and now we can log it, we can test it, or even chain handlers if needed. And if we want to review the old way, this is the old way. As you can see, we are defining these two methods here. So get error handler and get exception handler, same idea. And we have to temporarily unset it, you know, to just to get the reference and then restore it again. Pretty ugly, right? But this new feature is especially useful in framework custom logins or debugging tools where you want to inspect or wrap existing error handling logic. No, you can do that clearly and safely, right? So again, these features might seem minor, but they are super helpful. So let's keep going. The next feature improves fatal error debugging in a really nice way. Okay, let's move to feature list again. And then stack trace support for PHP fatal errors. All right, I can say that this one is a game changer for debugging fatal errors in PHP. Starting with PHP 8.5, get a stack trace when a fatal error occurs, right? And honestly, it's about time. So let's see how it's right now. Let's say you run this code with a small memory limit, right? So before PHP 8.5, this would just die with a message like this, that allow memory size of this byte exhausted, right? And that's it. No context, no idea how you got there unless you were already taking logs or stepping through manually, right? But now in PHP 8.5, you will also get a full stack trace in error output, just like you do with exceptions, right? Stack here. And this is very good. So instead of starting at the last line that broke, you get the full call chain that led to it. And also PHP added a new INI directive for this, and that's fatal error backtrace. As a default, it's on. So if you really want to disable that, you can just go to your php.ini and turn it off. And another thing is that this feature respects other setting too. It means that if display error is off, so no stack trace is shown, If you are using sensitive parameters, sensitive value in backtrace are hidden. And with Zend dot exception ignore args, so the arguments won't be shown in the trace. So yes, it's secure and sparse about what it reveals. This might feel like a small upgrade, but if you ever had to debug a memory exhaustion error or unexpected fatal crash in production, this stack trace will save you a lot of time. Okay, I'm gonna scroll up, go to 8.5, and now local right to left function and right to left method. Okay. So, if you're working on apps that support internationalization, especially with right to left languages, right? Arabic, Hebrew, or Persian, PHP 8.5 just made life easier. Before this release, if you wanted to check whether a language was RTL, you would probably end up hard coding a list of using some external libraries, and that was fine until you had to update it. So, what is new in PHP 8.5? Now, PHP 8.5 adds two new ways to check this natively, right? Using the ICU library under the hood. So, we have a global function here, which is the local is right to left. Also, we have a static method here. This is a global function, and this is the static method. And both variants, I mean the global function and the static function, both of them behave the same way. And this is important. So if the local is down to use an RTL script, they return true, otherwise false, and even invalid or empty local string will just save to return false. So you don't need to worry about the exceptions. And as you can see, this is how it works in action. You can simply call the function with the desired language. So if it's EN English, it's returning false, empty is false, and if it's RTL, it's returning true. And again, for exactly the same behavior we expect from the static one, right? Because the static one is basically just an alias for the global function, and that's it. And if we want to look into the old way I was talking about, this is probably what you have, a hard coded list here with a function like this, and it worked, right? But you had to keep that list up to date yourself. But with PHP 8.5, ICU handles that for you automatically, right? So now, whether you're rendering a multilingual UI, flipping layout, direction with CSS, or just formatting content dynamically, you can quickly check if a local is RTO with a single line of code. Super clear, right? So let's keep going. The next new additions make working with arrays a bit smoother with array first and array last. So let's go to the feature list and array first, array last. So this feature is simple but super practical and a nice UX improvement for working with arrays. And so now this one might seem small, but trust me, it's long overdue. The PHP 8.5 introduced two new functions that just make life easier when working with arrays, array first and array last. So what do they do? As the name suggests, the array first gets the first value in an array and array last gets the last value in an array. And if the array is empty, both returns null. But heads up, if your array actually contains null as a value, like where is that? Like this one, like null 2 and 3, it will still return that null as the first value. So, and also here in the array last, if you look into this one, if the last a value is null, it will return it null, right? So you should be careful about that. Maybe if you want, you can check it with the empty array if you are unsure. Okay. Before 8.5, this is what we have, right? The array first, we should have a function, and then we should get the first, the key first, and the key last. This is how it works right now, right? But PHP 8.5 make it easier for us. If you're feeling lazy, just install this package via Composer, and it works, I think, with PHP 7.3. Yeah, 7.3 and up. Just one important thing here. If your code already defined global functions called array first and array last, you will get a fatal error in 8.5, you know? So you will either need to rename your functions or move them to a namespace. So array first and array last, they aren't, flashy, but they're kind of functions that you will use everywhere. So now let's look at something handy for CLI devs, right? Let's go to 8.5 and the last one, which is the PHP INI directive. This is a nice little gem for CLI users and sysadmins, right? If you ever troubleshoot weird PHP behavior and wonder, wait, which INI setting are different from the defaults? PHP 8.5 has a new CLI tool just for that. PHP 8.5 introduced a new command line flag, which is the php-ini equal div, and this command output all the ini settings that have been changed from their default values. So if you run php-help, so it will show you this -ini div and the description. And if you run that, you will see something like this, that so it shows that you can instantly spot differences, without digging through full config dumps or parsing PHP info, right? So another heads up is that this feature plays nicely with other PHP CLI flags too, right? So if you temporarily oversetting with D and run -inrd, you will get a result like this, right? So before PHP 8.5, before this feature, we had to manually read through the full output of php-ini or dump everything via php info and visually compare. It wasn't fun. So this php-ini div just cuts through the noise and gives you only what changed. So this is a CLI only feature. If you run it on older PHP versions, it just defaults back to regular -ini behavior and no error. And here you can see that it's saying that it's a new CLI option added in PHP 8.5, doesn't cause any backward compatibility issue. And calling this on older PHP CLI does not cause any error, but the output will be the same as the PHP-ini. This is an important thing. So this is a simple but again super useful, especially if you are debugging across environments or handling off reports to other developers. So now let's talk about what's being deprecated in PHP 8.5, the old mhash constants. So let's move to 8.5 and let's move here. So in PHP 8.5, all mhash constants are officially deprecated. So these constants were part of the legacy mhash extension, which was already kind of on live support. The actual mhash function was deprecated in PHP 8.1 but the constant is stuck around until now. So what's happening now, if you run something like this, you will get two, warning. The first one is that m hash is deprecated since 8.1, and the new one would be that the constant m hash sh1 is deprecated. So now if you use both the function and the constant, you will get two deprecation warning. And what should you use instead? The modern way to hash something in PHP is with hash and hash hashmac functions. These are string-based algorithm names, not constants. So this is a simple hash, so we can just simply run the hash is hash sha1 test and true, and this is the hmac one, right? We can just pass it as this, and that true, and the end, I mean this one and this one, means you want a raw binary output, just like m hash used to return by default, right? And this is the constant mapping examples, and you can just look into that for a quick map, right? And you get the idea. Just switch from constants to string and you're good. So why this matters? If you're working in legacy code bases or maintaining ancient APIs, this might pop up in your error logs after upgrading to PHP 8.5. So replacing m hash and m hash constants with hash and string based algorithms is a future proof and cross version safe, right? All right, that's a full rundown of what's coming in PHP 8.5, from new functions to CLI tools and even some well needed cleanups, right? I hope this helped you get a clear picture of what to expect and how to start preparing your code base. And before we end, just a quick personal note. This is my first YouTube video, and I've put a lot of thought into making it valuable for developers like you. So if you enjoy it and learn something new, I would really appreciate your support. A like, a comment, or even a subscribe would mean a lot. It gives me the energy and motivation to keep going and create more videos about modern tech in programming and AI. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.